It was a cold and dark December night in 1975 when the Lutz family found themselves in front of their new home in Amityville, New York. The night was so eerie that they could hardly believe the lucky deal they had gotten. George Lutz, his wife Kathy, and their 3 children were ecstatic. The house was huge, with 3 stories, large windows, and an ambience that promised to be the home of their dreams. But soon, their optimism would turn into something very different. As they crossed the threshold, a chilling sensation ran down Kathy's spine. It must be just the winter, she thought as she tried to ignore the discomfort. However, the house seemed alive. The long, dark hallways seemed to whisper ancient secrets, and each step they took on the creaking stairs felt as if the house was reluctant to allow their passage. The first few days were normal, but a strange feeling began to emerge, supernatural and undeniable. Small disturbances started to appear. A cold draft that swept through the rooms even with the windows closed, inaudible whispers seeming to come from the walls, and a strange, fetid odor of decomposition that appeared and disappeared without explanation. One night, while George and Kathy were assembling furniture in one of the downstairs rooms, they heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps upstairs. Their hearts stopped. The children, George murmured, but when he went upstairs, he found himself in deadly silence. The children were asleep, but the footsteps continued, echoing directly above him. The house, which once seemed like a promising refuge, began to reveal its true face, a cruel and icy smile. At that point, the family still didn't know, but the nightmare was only beginning to unfold, and Amityville was hungry. The Lutz family decided it was time to seek help. Kathy suggested talking to some neighbors, hoping they could provide some explanation for the inexplicable events. It was during one of these conversations that Mary, an elderly woman who had lived on the same street for decades, revealed the house's grim past. "You don't know, do you?" Mary asked, her face etched with horror. "There was a massacre in that house. The DeFeo family lived there before you. The eldest son, Ronald DeFeo Jr.B., killed his parents and siblings while they slept. All of them with a rifle." Kathy felt her blood run cold. Every word Mary said seemed to weigh a ton. She ran home, cold sweat running down her temples, and told George everything. Initially skeptical, he began to piece it all together in his mind. That strange red room in the basement, the smell of decomposition, the footsteps upstairs. It all made sense now. The house was marked by an unimaginable tragedy, and the souls of those brutally murdered seemed trapped there, unable to rest. That night, during dinner, a heavy silence hung over the family. The children noticed the change in their parents' behavior, but didn't fully understand why. The atmosphere was tense, as if the air was charged with electricity. It was late when Kathy, after putting the children to bed, heard something that paralyzed her with fear. A muffled cry coming from the hallway. She got up slowly, trying not to make any noise. As she turned the corner, she saw something that made her scream. A tall, indistinct shadow stood in front of Missy's room, staring at the closed door. When the shadow turned, Kathy felt a wave of absolute terror. Those glowing red eyes seemed to pierce her soul. She backed away into George's room, panic consuming her. "George, there's something here," she stammered. They knew they had to do something, but doubt lingered. The house was full of darkness and secrets, and the Lutzes began to wonder if they would survive what was yet to come. What once seemed like a dream opportunity was revealing itself to be a living nightmare, where every dark corner and every whisper unveiled a piece of the house's terrifying history. And each day, the malevolent power that permeated Amityville only seemed to grow. George took a deep breath, trying to process what Kathy had just told him. Despite the growing fear, he decided it was time to confront whatever was terrorizing his family. George knew he had to act. He grabbed a flashlight and a Bible from the house and decided to explore the house one last time, this time with a new perspective. George's footsteps echoed through the dark corridors as he descended to the basement. He turned on the flashlight and focused the beam on the small secret room with the red walls. This time, he caught a glimpse of something different, strange symbols and marks that seemed carved into the walls. As he approached, he felt a sudden pressure on his chest, as if something invisible and heavy was pushing him back. George opened the Bible and began to read aloud, his words trembling with fear and determination. It was then that he heard a deafening roar, as if the house itself was screaming in agony. The lights flickered, and the temperature in the room plummeted. An invisible force slammed the secret room's door shut violently. George was thrown backward, his flashlight sliding across the floor and going out as it hit the wall. Meanwhile, upstairs, Kathy and the children heard the roar and ran to the basement. They found George struggling to get up, pale and trembling. "We need to get out of here now," he shouted, the urgency in his voice too clear to ignore. They all ran up the stairs, and the events in that hellish house worsened. The walls began to sweat blood, and dark shadows danced in every corner. An infernal wind swept through the corridors, carrying the screams and laments of the DeFeo family like a choir of lost souls. George barely had time to grab the car keys. With his terrified family clinging to him, they ran to the vehicle and sped down the road, not looking back. Sitting in the car, already far from the house, they looked one last time at the dark silhouette of the house against the gray sky. Something was there, watching them, but this time confined to the property's boundaries. The Lutz family never returned to Amityville. They left behind not just a house, but an unbearable nightmare that challenged their sanity and threatened their lives. On that cold December night, they learned that certain doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. And so, with heavy hearts and their sanity in tatters, the Lutz family vowed never to speak again of what they found at 112 Ocean Avenue, the house that devoured souls. The Lutz family decided to start their lives anew away from Amityville, but the experience marked them in ways that not even time could completely erase. Months passed, yet the terror they had lived through still seemed to whisper in the corners of their minds, especially at night. George, once a rational and skeptical man, began to have terrible nightmares. He would wake up sweating, hearing the ghostly sounds of voices filling the house. He felt a constant presence around him, as if the house had left a macabre part of itself inside him. His hands trembled as he tried to maintain a normal routine, but any unexpected noise made his heart race. Kathy also did not escape unscathed. Her nights were haunted by visions of Jody, the red-eyed pig Missy had described. She couldn't help but frequently warn the children, her hands always trembling, her voice interrupted by residual fear. At times, she felt her reflection looked at her with a different expression in the mirror, mocking her attempt to return to normalcy. The children, though young, also carried invisible scars. Missy stopped talking about Jody, but became an introspective and shy child, often drawing strange figures with penetrating eyes. Her siblings became overly protective, never leaving her alone in any room of the new house. Over time, the Lutz family realized they needed help to overcome the trauma. They found a therapist specialized in paranormal events who helped them unpack their experiences and cope with daily life in fear. But some wounds refused to heal completely. Some nights, Kathy and George would wake up anxious, and the children's cries often echoed through the house at the most unexpected moments. Meanwhile, the house in Amityville remained an object of fascination and terror for the public. Stories of apparitions, mysterious sounds, and inexplicable experiences continued to emerge from numerous sources. Paranormal researchers, the curious, and ghost hunters frequently visited 112 Ocean Avenue, each leaving more disturbed than when they arrived. The new owners, eager to dispel the house's bad reputation, carried out drastic renovations. They changed windows, doors, and even the color of the walls. However, for those who knew its history, these were merely futile attempts to mask a dark truth. Something ancient and malevolent still resided there, quiet but always lurking, waiting for its next act of despair. The Lutzes, far from that cursed residence, found a way to move forward, even while dragging the fragments of an experience they could never fully explain. They learned to live with one eye open, aware that some doors, once crossed, cast a shadow that can never be completely undone. George felt that despite all efforts to move on, the bond with the house in Amityville persisted. The sleepless nights, constant nightmares, and the feeling of being watched had become unbearable. He could no longer live with the shadow of that experience looming over his life. That's when he decided to return. He couldn't abandon his family to this curse. He knew he needed to confront whatever resided in that place one last time. Kathy, as reluctant as she was, understood George's decision. She feared for his safety, but something deep within her also compelled her to face the truth head-on. They sought help from a friend of George, a priest experienced in exorcisms. Father Frank accepted the request without hesitation, believing that faith and courage could purify the house of horrors. Armed with Bibles, holy water, and determination, the three returned to Amityville. They arrived at the house at dusk. The renovations did little to mask the heavy, oppressive energy emanating from the structure. Father Frank led the way with prayers, and as they crossed the threshold, they felt a supernatural chill envelop them. They headed straight to the basement, the origin of many of the macabre events. Father Frank began to pray fervently, sprinkling holy water on the red walls. George and Kathy stood aside, watching, feeling the tension in the air escalate with every word. Soon, the room seemed to close in around them. Lights flickered desperately. The temperature fluctuated in incongruous waves. The distant roar, one that George remembered so well, grew until it became deafening. Father Frank, undeterred, raised his prayers even higher, calling for the expulsion of any malevolent entity. And then it happened. The shadow Kathy had seen before, with incandescent red eyes, manifested once more, but this time in a more tangible and ferocious form. George felt terror grip his body, but amidst the fear, a visceral courage surged within him. He was face to face with the source of it all, the very embodiment of evil. Father Frank intensified his prayers, and the dark figure writhed, screaming with a sound like ice breaking. The walls sweated blood again, but this time, the droplets evaporated as soon as they touched the ground, as if burned by the sacred presence of the clergyman. With a final cry, accompanied by the most powerful exorcism words Frank knew, the shadow shattered into 1,000 pieces of darkness, dissipating into the air. The roar abruptly ceased, giving way to a heavy silence. The oppression lifted from the room, and the temperature returned to normal. The Lutz looked around, stunned and exhausted, but they felt a lightness they hadn't experienced in a long time. As they left the house for the last time, there was an unprecedented peace on both their faces. George, especially, felt purified and freed from the curse that had afflicted them. Father Frank, satisfied with the outcome, blessed the house one last time before they departed. With one last glance back, the Lutz family finally felt the possibility of a fresh start. The amalgam of darkness and light that marked their lives had finally been balanced. And while the house in Amityville fell silent, the Lutz could move forward with their lives, free from the burden they had carried for so long, knowing they had faced and overcome the true evil that once gripped their souls. Even after the exorcism ritual, George and Kathy's life entered a period of adjustment. The peace in their new home was something they had almost forgotten how to feel. The Lutz family no longer experienced the supernatural events that once haunted their daily lives, but the emotional scars were still evident. George began attending regular therapy sessions, finding solace in sharing his experiences with an outsider. He also reconnected with his hobbies, especially woodworking, discovering that working with his hands alleviated his internal turmoil. Kathy returned to painting, her canvases now filled with vibrant colors, a departure from the dark tones that once dominated her creations. The children, on the other hand, showed signs of surprising resilience. Missy, despite her introspection, began to open up again, her paintings and drawings returning to normalcy. Encouraged by a loving and secure environment, the siblings slowly rebuilt their trust. Over time, the Lutzes decided that their story needed to be shared. Not to seek fame, but to alert other families and researchers to the hidden dangers in seemingly normal places. They hired an author to write about their experiences, hoping that by revealing the truth, they could help others avoid similar pain. During the writing of the book, George and Kathy shared with the author every detail, no matter how small. Reliving those moments was painful, but also cathartic. Each filled page served as a reminder of their courage and resilience. In some sessions, they interviewed acquaintances who had also had paranormal experiences, expanding the understanding of the phenomenon. Nevertheless, remnants of the past sometimes crept into daily life. Unexplained cold spots or a sudden feeling of being watched would sporadically emerge. But unlike in the old house, these manifestations were fleeting and no longer inspired paralyzing fear. The publication of the book inevitably drew media attention and ghost hunters. People from all over wanted to visit the iconic Amityville house and explore its dark secrets. However, many encountered an almost ordinary structure. It seemed that the ritual performed by Father Frank not only expelled the spirits, but also deactivated the malignant focus that once resided there. Eventually, the media storm subsided, and the Lutzes could finally close this chapter of their lives. Their blank pages became a living testament to the battle they faced and overcame. Kathy and George established a foundation to offer free psychological support to victims of paranormal events, providing other families with the support they themselves had needed. The children thrived, following their own paths, but always carrying the fundamental understanding that courage and compassion are the best weapons against any darkness. In the end, the Lutzes found serenity. They did not forget what they had been through, but used the experience to deepen their family bond further. And in the tranquility of their new lives, they could finally build good memories, flourishing in the field where fear once grew. Even after the exorcism ritual, George and Kathy's life entered a period of adjustment. The peace in their new home was something they had almost forgotten how to feel. The Lutz family no longer experienced the supernatural events that once haunted their daily lives, but the emotional scars were still evident. George started attending regular therapy sessions, finding solace in sharing his experiences with an outsider. He also reconnected with his hobbies, especially woodworking, discovering that working with his hands relieved his internal turmoil. Kathy resumed painting, her canvases now filled with vibrant colors, a departure from the dark tones that once dominated her creations. The children, on the other hand, showed signs of surprising resilience. Missy, despite her introspection, began to open up again, her paintings and drawings returning to normalcy. Encouraged by a loving and secure environment, the siblings slowly rebuilt their trust. Over time, the Lutzes decided that their story needed to be shared. Not to seek fame, but to alert other families and researchers to the hidden dangers in seemingly normal places. They hired an author to write about their experiences, hoping that by revealing the truth, they could help others avoid the same pain. During the writing of the book, George and Kathy shared with him every detail, no matter how small. Reliving those moments was painful, but also cathartic. Each filled page served as a reminder of their courage and resilience. In some sessions, they interviewed acquaintances who had also had paranormal experiences, broadening the understanding of the phenomenon. Nevertheless, remnants of the past sometimes crept into daily life. Unexplained cold spots or a sudden feeling of being watched would sporadically emerge, but unlike in the old house, these manifestations were fleeting and no longer inspired paralyzing fear. The publication of the book inevitably drew media attention and ghost hunters. People from all over wanted to visit the iconic Amityville house and explore its dark secrets. However, many encountered an almost ordinary structure. It seemed that the ritual performed by Father Frank not only expelled the spirits, but also deactivated the malignant focus that once resided there. Eventually, the media storm subsided, and the Lutzes could finally close this chapter of their lives. Their blank pages became a living testament to the battle they faced and overcame. Kathy and George established a foundation to offer free psychological support to victims of paranormal events, providing other families with the support they themselves had needed. The children thrived, following their own paths, but always carrying the fundamental understanding that courage and compassion are the best weapons against any darkness. In the end, the Lutzes found serenity. They did not forget what they had been through, but used the experience to deepen their family bond further. And in the tranquility of their new lives, they could finally build good memories, flourishing in the field where fear once grew. The serenity that the Lutz family found in their new home was palpable. Daily routines, moments of joy, and small triumphs filled their house, restoring a sense of normalcy. Yet, like on a summer morning when an unexpected breeze brings a shiver, they occasionally felt echoes from beyond. One night, Kathy was home alone. The children were at school, and George was at a foundation meeting. She took advantage of the quiet to paint. She was finishing a colorful portrait of flowers symbolizing renewal and hope. Lost in her thoughts, she almost didn't notice the sound of light footsteps behind her. When she turned around, she saw nothing. A familiar chill ran down her spine, but she took a deep breath, reminding herself that their home was finally free. She continued painting, but a thought lingered in her mind. What if some fragment of evil still lingered with them? With conscious effort, she focused on the positivity their new home brought, pushing away any remnants of fear. George, on the other hand, felt a strange connection to the toolbox he regularly used. One morning, he noticed that his old hammer, which he had left at the Amityville house, was back, clean and shiny. George was filled with a mix of curiosity and fear. He decided he needed to consult someone with wisdom beyond human and religious knowledge. He sought out a medium named Marcus, renowned for his sensitivity and ability to communicate with the beyond. The meeting was scheduled for a full moon night. Sitting around a small table, Marcus guided George to close his eyes and focus on the hammer. "I sense a presence," murmured the medium. "A warning, perhaps. Something linked to you, George. But not to the house." George shivered. "What do you mean by that? Sometimes objects carry energy from what they've experienced. Your hammer may have absorbed much of what happened in Amityville. It might need purification or destruction." This revelation worried George, but he trusted Marcus's judgment. Together, they decided to perform a purification ritual. With candles and incense, Marcus prayed and sprinkled holy water on the hammer. In a final act of detachment, George smashed it with a heavy hammer. He felt an immediate release, as if a shadow had lifted from his spirit. The children, meanwhile, adapted better to their new surroundings. However, Missy seemed more connected to what they had left behind. In recurring dreams, she saw the Amityville house, now empty and in ruins. The dreams weren't frightening. They were more like silent visits to an old place. Praying every night beside her, Kathy taught her to channel these visions into her paintings, transforming what was unsettling into sublime art. Years passed. The Amityville house became shrouded in legends and myths, but for the Lutzes, it became just a distant memory. Appearances and manifestations dwindled, hiding in the shadows of time. The family foundation thrived, helping many other families find peace after disturbing supernatural experiences. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Yet George knew that special moments, like when the family gathered on holidays or had late-night conversations by the fireplace, were when their souls connected most deeply, strengthened by the trials they faced together. And then, on one of those nights, while stargazing in a nearby meadow, Missy asked, "Dad, do you think we'll ever see that house again?" George looked at her, then at Kathy and the other children, and replied with a serene smile, "Maybe, Missy. But if that day comes, we'll do it together, and nothing can separate us." And so, under a sky full of stars, the Lutz family finally discovered the true dimension of their courage. It wasn't just about facing ghosts and demons, but about their ability to turn darkness into light and fear into love. As long as they stayed together, any challenge, even echoes from beyond, would be just notes in a larger and more beautiful symphony of their lives. Did you enjoy this chilling journey in Amityville? Want to keep exploring mysteries and uncovering stories that go beyond imagination? Then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. This way, you won't miss any updates on the most intriguing and spine-tingling topics from the supernatural world. Like this video to show us you enjoyed it, and leave a comment about what you thought of the Lutz's story. We want to hear your feedback and suggestions for new content. Hit the bell icon to be the first to know when we release new videos. Join our community of explorers of the unknown and share this video with your friends who love a good mystery. Thank you for watching, and until the next adventure.